And before I begin, I would like to thank Dr. Swami for giving me this opportunity to share a few words about translation. Actually, the topic is translation, challenges and solutions. It's a big topic actually, and I would be talking about a few points, not all of them actually. In fact, I will start with the etymological meaning of translation. It's actually derived from Latin, trans in the sense of over or across, and latio in the sense of carry. So, carry over it is, that is carrying over a text from one language to another language, or carrying over a text into another text in another language. The same word in Greek actually is called metaphrase. Meta again meaning over, phrase meaning speak. So it is speaking over. In fact, metaphrase is a literal, the meaning of metaphrase is a literal translation. Whereas paraphrase, another word from Greek, expresses the meaning of the same text using different words, not a literal translation. Actually, translators are not metaphrasers, they are paraphrasers, meaning they actually use different words to describe the same thing. And therefore, it is a kind of interpretation, and translation is an interpretation, and a translator is an interpreter. Now, when you carry over a text from one language to another, do you miss something in that process of carrying over? That is always a question a translator asks himself, that whether something is lost when you carry over the text into another language. In fact, Robert Frost actually talks about it. There is a very famous quotation from Robert Frost, but it is actually a misquote, but it got stuck to the name of Robert Frost, and that is a definition of poetry. He says poetry is what is lost in translation. Translation challenges and solutions. And I have been talking about Robert Frost, and Frost, to repeat, Frost said that poetry is what is lost in translation. So, what did he mean by that? Maybe he doesn't actually clarify anything about it because this is a misquote. And maybe what is meant by the quote is that poetry is untranslatable, one thing. Or maybe he took the word poetry as a metaphor, and he may have been telling that uh, the spirit of the poem or spirit of the original text cannot actually be translated. You may be able to translate the words, and maybe to a certain extent the structure, but it is not possible to convey the inherent spirit of the poetry. And that is actually the primary and foremost challenge of a translator, how to convey the spirit of the original author. Definitely, at the fundamental level, we translate what you call the syntax and semantics of the text. Even at the level of syntax, meaning structure, there can be problems because different languages have different structures. For example, in English, we say he ate a mango, which actually moves in the pattern of subject, object, and subject, verb, and object, SVO pattern we say. Whereas when we actually carry it over to Hindi, it becomes wo ek aam khaya. I mean, the pattern completely changes. It actually becomes subject, object, and verb. Now, when we translate into Hindi, you can see that pattern changes. So, when you consider even the structure, there can be problems. And in English, sometimes a single sentence can run into one full paragraph. And if you actually translate it into another language, you may not be able to faithfully reproduce it as it is. you may have to cut it into smaller sentences. And while cutting into smaller sentences, the style, the original style, will be definitely lost. But what, as a translator, I look at is not exactly reproducing the same style. I do it as far as possible, but what I primarily look at is whether the spirit of that statement is actually, maintained, whether the spirit is lost or not. And I can sacrifice style for the sake of spirit. I mean, so when I translate, I do not actually stick very closely to the grammar and the length of the statement. Actually, in this connection, what I remember is an anecdote from Tagore's life. An anecdote from Tagore's life. Now, he translated Gitanjali into English. You know that. He himself was the translator of his famous Gitanjali. And not being so confident about his own English, he actually gave the book to C.F. Andrews to make corrections. And C.F. Andrews is basically a teacher. And teachers are sticklers of grammar, or they want grammar to be perfect. So what C.F. Andrews did was he corrected the poem in 3 places, and Tagore accepted it. And while he was in London in a train, I heard this anecdote that in a train in London, Tagore met W.B. Yeats, the famous English poet, Irish poet, W.B. Yeats. And he wanted Yeats to read Gitanjali translation. And Yeats read the book and told Tagore there are 3 places where the poem doesn't flow, or the poem is actually looking rigid. And Tagore was surprised and he asked him which are those 3 places. And those 3 places, surprisingly, was the places, those 3 places were the places where Andrews made the correction. And Yeats told him to change it into the original translation. And then he said, now the flow is okay. Now, I told you this anecdote in order to say that if you are actually faithfully trying to reproduce a statement as it is into another language, you may lose the spirit, but you may be true and loyal to your grammar. So that is actually what I want to talk about, the structure. And uh, uh, coming to semantic concerns, a word in a language may have an equivalent in another language. Most of the English words can have its equivalents in other languages. Even synonyms, the nuances of synonyms also can be captured. We have words like happiness, joy, ecstasy with various nuances. The same synonyms can be translated into Malayalam or any of the Indian languages with the same, with the nuances not being lost. But then there are certain words which are actually peculiar to a language. You will find that word and the concept also only in that language. You may not have an equivalent in other languages. For example, if an experience is universal, of course, the word representing it also can be universal. And there will be equivalents in other languages. But you must have heard that for Eskimos, for Inuits, the word snow has 16 synonyms, which in no other language you can find. Obviously, their experience of snow is fundamentally very, very different from the experience of snow, the experience of snow by others. And we cannot translate all of those synonyms into any other language. In English, for snow, we have only few synonyms. And when you come to South Indian languages, the number will again get reduced. So when we have to translate that experience of the Eskimos, either we will have to create a new word, meaning coin a word, in which case the translator actually becomes a creator, or the translator becomes trans creator. Otherwise, you will have to keep the word as it is. To illustrate it a little more, see, in German, you have actually the word Schadenfreude. And the meaning of Schadenfreude is the pleasure you derive from the misery of your neighbor. That maybe the neighbor actually slips on a banana peel and falls, and then you are so happy that he has been miserable, and that feeling of pleasure derive some sort of sadistic pleasure actually, that is expressed by the word Schadenfreude. And English, there is no equivalent word for Schadenfreude. So the English people simply adopted that word into their own language. It is a German word, but it also gained currency in the English language. Another such term is actually a word, a Scottish word, fey. I mean, there are several untranslatable words actually. I am taking only two examples. This is actually the word fey. Fey is actually, I mean, if you look up in the dictionary, they will give you the meaning as clairvoyance. But it's not clairvoyance actually. It is a sensing of danger or sensing of misery when when you are in utmost happiness, when you are exulting. Maybe you have become victorious and you are over the moon. And when you are over the moon, suddenly you feel that something bad is going to happen immediately afterwards. That feeling is actually called fey. And there is no equivalent word in English for that, or for that matter, I don't think even in our own languages, in Indian languages, we have an equivalent. Actually, in Malayalam, we say, I mean, we tell the children that if you laugh hard, then you will have to cry. Meaning, following immense happiness, there will be immense trouble or misery. That is a proverb actually in Malayalam. And this is a word which captures that proverbs, this thing. So if I want to translate the word fey into my language, that is Malayalam, then I would not be actually using one word like fey. I will be using this proverb. Like if you laugh hard, don't laugh hard, it will bring misery. So that is it. So what is conveyed by fey can be experienced only by a Scottish person. And there are so many such untranslatable words. And for example, to give you one more example, in England, we have this phrase, rise with the lark. Now, lark is actually a bird which is found only in England. We don't have, I don't think we have larks in India. Or at least in South India, I haven't seen any lark. So what do? We can't actually translate it as rise with the lark. Maybe here in India, we rise with the crow or we rise with the rooster. Rise with the rooster will be more familiar than rise with the crow. So that way you can overcome it. Now, this is actually an idiomatic expression, rise with the lark. I will come back to that when I want to talk about what you call the problems of idioms. Now, another word, what they use in English is actually siesta. Siesta is actually a word for afternoon nap. And in the culture of the US or in the culture of UK, they don't have this concept of sleeping in the afternoon. Only in tropical countries, in Latin American countries, in Spain, in the south of India, we do take a nap in the afternoon, and we have a word for that. In Spanish, they call it siesta. And when the English wanted to translate siesta into English, they did not have an equivalent word. So what they did was actually they kept the siesta as it is. Even in English, you have the word siesta, but it is not an original English word. It is actually adopted from Spanish. Now, coming back to that rise with the lark, it's an idiomatic expression. And the idioms and proverbs are actually another challenge that a translator faces. We cannot have a literal translation for a proverb, or even for that matter for idioms. There may be equivalent idioms and equivalent proverbs in a stitch in nine, a stitch in time saves nine. You have an equivalent proverb in Indian languages. Make the hay while the sun shines. I mean, I didn't find an equivalent for that kind of a proverb. Make the hay when the sun shines. But there is an equivalent proverb with a different kind of experience. In Malayalam we say, winnow the grain when the wind blows. Kaatteറിഞ്ഞ് തൂറ്റണം. That is meaning, seize the opportunity, or when the opportunity comes, make use of it. So it is an entirely different kind of a proverb actually, but in essence, it actually gets you the meaning of make hay while sun shines. Now, if you have it rains cats and dogs, now we can't literally translate it. Maybe it will become something like it rains bricks and stones. So, metaphrasing, that is literally translating idioms and proverbs, will look very absurd. And it will not actually be capturing the spirit also. So, in English, for example, you say, you cannot see properly when you are upset. And in Sanskrit, you have an equivalent proverb which captures the spirit, but in a different way. Vinasha kale viparita buddhi. Vinasha kale viparita buddhi is the same as you cannot see properly when you are upset. So you, a translator, must have that flexibility to find out equivalent proverbs and idioms in the target language. And even, I mean, pronunciation issue, especially when it comes to proper nouns, like the names of people, names of buildings. Actually, when you transcribe the name into your own language from English or from other foreign languages into your target language, that transcription has to match the pronunciation of the word. But then certain words actually, as they move from language to language, their pronunciation changes. Actually, in the latest book of Salman Rushdie, that is Don Quixote, the title of the book is Don Quixote, he actually gives a note. The note is actually called a quixotic note on pronunciation. Because the word quixote, originally from Cervantes Spanish, can be pronounced in several ways. In French, it is Quixote. Quixote. In German, Quixote. And when it comes to Spanish, it is Coijote or Quixote. And in the early Spanish of Cervantes, it is Quixote. So when I want to write Quixote, Quixote, how do I actually translate it? Transcribe it. What letters? Should I write it as Quixote or Quixote or Quixote? Now that actually is a problem. And what I do is actually I select the most popular pronunciation. The most popular, if it is actually the English pronunciation, I transcribe it in the way it is spoken in English. So that is also a problem. I mean, when proper nouns, where proper nouns are concerned. Okay. For example, when Bible, the English Bible was translated into Malayalam, all the names actually got changed. Jesus became Yeshu. You know, the famous Malayalam singer Yeshu Das is actually Jesus' servant. So Jesus becomes Yeshu, John becomes Yohanan, and you can see there is a Hebrew touch. Actually, those translators actually gave a Hebrew touch to these words. Judas becomes Judas. That word J, that letter J, actually becomes Judas, or Mark becomes Marcos, Luke, Lucas, Matthew, he is called Matthias. So, uh, for example, there is a character called Job in English, J-O-B, and in Malayalam it becomes Job, Job, that J becomes Job. So they were actually going by the Hebrew pronunciation of these English terms. In English it is Job, in English it is Jesus, Mark, John, but the because originally they were written in Hebrew, these people must have thought of giving it a Hebrew touch. And like these idioms and proverbs, we also will have a problem with the slangs. It is quite a challenge to translate a slang expression into the target language. Just to look at that word shit, it is a universal used slang, shit. And if you cannot actually literally translate that into any of the Indian languages. If you translate it like that, it will not actually be nice. So if it is in Tamil, for example, instead of saying shit, we may say mannangatti. Mannangatti conveys the same sense as what you call the word shit. So you will have to metaphrase it. You cannot metaphrase it. You can only paraphrase it. And the very slang shit actually changes its meaning according to the context. It can be used to express happiness. It can be used to express dismay. It can be expressed actually even that F word. That F word is used in several occasions, in several contexts. Actually, Osho Rajanish has given 15 meanings to the word, that F word. 15 meanings. Because the meaning can change according to these quotations. So, and when I was translating Love and Capital, that is the biography of Karl Marx, when it comes to Karl Marx's eldest son, Edgar speaks in slang. He has actually picked up the British slang from the streets of Soho. So he will not say father is not at home. He will say father ain't no home. He uses the double negative, which is again difficult to translate as it is. So an equivalent slang in your own language, you will have to find out. So I will come back to this point after elaborating on some of the socio-cultural differences. Language, as you know, is part of a culture, and if the translator is not familiar with the culture of the source language and the target language, he can face difficulties. For example, consider, the pronoun he. He can be used to refer to a boy. He can be used to refer to a grown-up man. But in India, if you take the case of Hindi, the boy will be wo, and the grown-up man also can be called wo. But if you are actually, being respectful to the person, you will have to use the word way. Or you take that word you. We have only one you. Earlier in English, you had thee and thou to demarcate the singular you and plural you. But today we have only you, whether it is one person, whether it is actually a woman or a man, you use the pronoun you. But in Hindi, you will have to actually recognize to whom you are addressing. You can call somebody tu, and you can call someone tum, you can call someone aap, and these three pronouns, tu, tum, aap, actually are used in different contexts, and it connotes actually different kinds of what you call emotions. Aap is very respectful, actually a sort of admiring kind of pronoun, whereas tum is just respectable. Tu is, in fact, a very familiar kind of you. So, even in pronouns, I mean, what I mean to say is actually, even when you are dealing with the pronouns, you will have to decide whether you have to use tu, tum, or ap. That is one example. And when the English Bible was actually translated into, not English Bible, when the Greek or Latin Bible, and you know the history that from Hebrew, the language spoken by Jesus was Aramaic. The New Testament was written in Hebrew, then in Greek, then in Latin. And from there it came to English. And in the English Bible, there are two places when or where Jesus actually addresses his mother as woman. That translation has created problems actually. People thought that Jesus was being rude to his mother. One occasion is the occasion of a wedding at a place called Cana. Jesus' mother comes to him and asks Jesus to help the guests. And at that time, Jesus tells her, now this is the quote from the Bible, and this is spoken by Jesus himself. Woman, what concern is that to you and me? Woman, what concern is that to you and me? So he addresses his mother, woman, in that place. In one more place, he calls his mother woman, and that was just before his crucifixion. And at that time, I quote, woman, here is your son. That is the way he addressed his mother. Now, the problem is in the original language of Jesus, which is Aramaic, woman can have two meanings. One, in the sense of woman, the literal meta phrase woman, but it can also be paraphrased as mother. Another meaning for woman, the word woman in Aramaic is actually mother. So when they translated the Bible into English, they did not actually pay attention to this problem in Aramaic, whether to translate it as woman or mother. And you know, because of that, Jesus has been thought to be very rude to his mother. Another instance, a mistranslation, I would say, is from the same Bible. Actually, in the same Bible, there is a saying attributed to Jesus. And the saying is this, let me quote, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. I would read it once again. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Now he has closed the kingdom of heaven to all rich people. So by this quotation, or if you take the meaning of that quotation, it means that no rich man can ever get into the kingdom of heaven. But this is again a mistranslation, because during those days, Jesus did not actually mean the literal needle actually and its hole. In fact, in those days, in the synagogues, that is the Jewish churches, there were two gates. One gate for worshippers. Actually, you know, synagogue was a place. In those days, synagogues were places where not only worshipping was done, there was also trade there. It was also a trading place. So there were two gates, a very wide gate for the worshippers to go in, and a narrow constricted gate for the traders to go in. And that gate is very narrow because the merchants going in have to stop there with their animals, pay their tolls, and then only they can enter. So it is difficult to enter through that gate actually. And therefore, the merchants of those days called this gate the eye of the needle. And it is actually a merchant slang, a slang from the merchants. So it doesn't refer to the literal needle and its eye. But today, nobody actually remembers that because the English Bible has distorted the meaning of that quotation. So again, that is because they were not, I mean, whoever translated Bible into English were not so familiar with the system in the synagogues of those times. So it is not the eye of a stitching needle. It is actually the gate meant for the merchants to go in. So that is another actually problem. I mean, if you are not so familiar with your culture, with the culture of source language and target language, you look at the word ox in English. In English, you can say as strong as an ox. It has actually a positive connotation. But ox will have, I mean, if you take a Kurdish language, ox is actually someone who is a glutton. And it will be a slanderous term if you call a person ox in Kurdish. So that is actually what and another thing is actually the sarcasm and humor in one culture will not be the same way as it is in another culture. My sense of humor or a Malayali sense of humor will not be the sense of humor of an Englishman. In fact, English people have very little humor. So and sometimes your humor may look like an insult. So especially when you are translating sarcastic things or sarcastic expressions and humorous expressions, very risible expressions, you will have to be very careful to see whether it will actually be fitting in that target culture. Okay. So in that context, even puns can also be considered. Puns are almost untranslatable because puns actually depend on the play of words. For example, scale, scale, I will look at the questions after I finish. I mean, okay, and coming back to puns. See, for example, you take the pun, scale the fish before you weigh it on a scale. So the pun is constructed on the word scale, the verb, and scale, the noun. Now, how can you literally translate it into that language? Okay. Or you take something like a windy road on a windy day. Again, the pun will be lost. Actually, most of the time, pun gets lost when you translate. And another problem, I mean, I will actually stop with one more problem, is actually neologisms. And when I say neologisms, new words, like, I mean, in English, especially when you are translating from English to other languages, in English, the English authors easily create new words. English is very flexible, so you can create neologism very easily. And especially in Indian languages, it is very difficult to create a new term. Even if you create a new term, it is very difficult for it to become popular. And unless it becomes popular, the neologism will simply die. It will just disappear from the language. So your effort will be lost. So what I do is either I will actually, elaborate that neologism, or I will see whether I can create a new word. When in English, when they create neologisms, they take recourse to Greek or Latin. What I do is actually I take recourse to Sanskrit. Just as they use Greek and Latin, I use Sanskrit. For example, I am actually right now translating a book called Gene, an intimate history. And there are several words which are actually created by the original author, Siddharth Mukherjee. It's a very fascinating book, actually. And he is a master of neologism. And also the people whom he is describing, they were also masters of neologism. For example, they have this word called allele, taken from Greek. Allele, I suppose the spelling, I am not very sure about the spelling. And that is actually picked up from Greek. In fact, it has a very simple meaning. It means the other. But these people are using the word allele in place of the other because other cannot be used as a technical term. So they used it as allele. And I took recourse to Sanskrit and translated it as aparam. Aparam means the other. They have a word like genotype, which is a combination of gene plus type. And I translated it as Janitaka Rupam, Sanskritized. They have another word, phenotype. Pheno from phenomenon and type. So I again took recourse to Sanskrit and translated it as Pratibhasa Rupam. So that is how I actually overcame that difficulty. So I am concluding almost. And I conclude with a reference to Eleanor Marx. Eleanor Marx also was a translator. She was the first translator of Flaubert's Madame Bovary into English. And Flaubert was a rigorous stylist. It is very difficult to reproduce his French style into English. But Eleanor Marx successfully translated it. It is the best translation of Madame Bovary. There are many translations, but Eleanor Marx's translation is the best. And why, after translating that book, she wrote a preface to that book, and in that preface, she says, there are three types of translators. One is the genius. The first one is the genius. The second is the hacker, one who cuts, pastes, and whatever way he can actually divide the sentence, hacker. And the third is conscientious worker. And she categorizes herself as the third type. That is the conscientious worker. If you are a genius, you have no problem. And if you are a hacker, maybe you will be sacrificing style. But if you are a conscientious worker, remember it is a labor. And a kind of arduous task. But at the end of which you will be rewarded with, you not only will be rewarding yourself, you will be rewarding even your language. You will actually be contributing to the vocabulary and even sometimes the structure of language. So you make it richer, you make your language richer by your interpretation. So that is all for today. And I would like to have a look at the questions in the chat. And if I can answer, I may. Dr. Swami, very much. Thank you very much for the listeners too. Thank you.
Sir, we, on behalf of Dr. Swami Talks, we are very grateful to you for accepting to give a talk. And then this session has already been appreciated by all the people who attended in the chat session. We can see that, and it is very informative. And I myself have learned a lot in this. And then it is really eye-opening. And then so people like you, we are trying to bring in and then share your knowledge and expertise with others. And once again, I'm very, very thankful to you, because to make him accept this, Rajan sir he keeps very low profile and is not very much interested in talking to others. So just out of his love for me, and then his, you know, we worked together for some time in the past. So I'm proud to say that I've, worked in the same organization that Rajan sir worked. And thank you so much for,
Thank
you know,
you.
so for gracing the platform, sir,
Oh, thank you
with your
very much.
talk.
Actually, I thank you for giving this opportunity to talk to well-known people.
No, it's a privilege, sir. It's not giving an opportunity. It's the privilege of the participants and Dr. Swami talks also. It's an honor for us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you then.
Okay, sir. With that note, we would end the session. And if you want to connect with Rajan sir, and you just ping me, or you can write to us, and then I'll connect you to Rajan sir if you need any help in terms of translation or any other related works. Okay. So with that note, happy weekend. We'll call it a day, and thank you all the participants for attending this session. So you can just write to us, and we'll connect to Rajan sir. Okay. Bye for now. We'll meet on next Sunday.